The first time my mother was pushed that evening, I told myself it was an accident. It happened just outside the ballroom doors, beneath a chandelier so bright it made everyone look polished and unreal. My mother's heel caught slightly on the edge of the carpet as a woman in pale silver brushed past her, hard enough that my mother's clutch slipped from her fingers and hit the marble floor with a hollow clap. "I'm so sorry," the woman said, though she didn't slow down. She didn't even look back. I saw my mother bend, smooth and quiet, as if she were picking up something she'd dropped in her own kitchen, as if she hadn't just been dismissed like furniture. I should have walked over. I should have said something. Instead, I adjusted the lace on my sleeve and told myself, "It's just nerves." Weddings are chaotic. That was the first lie I told myself on my wedding day. The Ashford estate had always made me feel like I was visiting a museum where I wasn't allowed to touch anything. Tall white columns, manicured hedges cut so precisely they looked painted, the faint scent of gardenias floating through open windows. Garrett loved this place. He'd grown up running across these lawns, he once told me, chasing his older brother Julian with a wooden sword. I tried to imagine him as a little boy here. It helped soften the edges of the man he'd become. Our wedding had been planned down to the second. His mother, Brenda, had insisted on that. "Precision is elegance," she'd said during one of the early meetings, her manicured finger tapping the seating chart. "We don't want surprises." She smiled when she said it. I had smiled back. My mother, Deanna Sinclair, had sat quietly at the edge of that long mahogany table, her hands folded over her notebook. She wore her best navy blazer to those meetings, the one she'd bought years ago when she launched her first small consulting contract out of our dining room. My mother built everything she had with discipline and long hours. After my father left when I was 9, she worked 2 jobs, then 3. I remember falling asleep at the kitchen table while she balanced spreadsheets, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the silence between us. She never complained. Even when Brenda corrected her pronunciation of hors d'oeuvre, even when Garrett's aunt asked, in a bright voice, "And what does your husband do, Deanna?" my mother would simply smile and say, "It's just me and Maya, and that's always been enough." I used to think that answer was strength. Now I wonder if it was armor. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, there were small moments I didn't fully process, like the day the photographer sent over the preliminary family shot list. Brenda had forwarded it to me with a note, "We've streamlined this to focus on immediate Ashford family." There were 12 combinations listed. None included my mother alone. I stared at the document on my laptop while Garrett stood behind me, reading over my shoulder. "It's just logistics," he said lightly. "Mom's paying for most of this. She wants to keep it clean." "Clean," I repeated. "You know what I mean, not cluttered, not cluttered." The word lodged somewhere in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Weddings were stressful. I didn't want to be the emotional bride. I told my mother about it that evening while we sat at her kitchen counter, sharing takeout noodles from the carton. "Oh, sweetheart," she said gently. "I don't need a solo photo. I'll be in the big ones." But her eyes flickered down for just a second before she smiled again. I noticed. I just didn't push. By the time the ceremony began, everything looked perfect. The string quartet played softly as guests took their seats in neat rows across the lawn. The sky was a pale, forgiving blue. I could smell roses and freshly cut grass. I could send her pods it. I just hits tate-tet. When I walked down the aisle, I saw Garrett waiting beneath the arch of white peonies. He looked steady, handsome, certain. I loved him. That's the part people don't understand when they hear what happened next. I loved him. He squeezed my hands during the vows, and when he said, "I choose you," his voice trembled in a way that felt real. For a moment, I believed that love would be enough to smooth over everything else. The ceremony ended in applause. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter carried across the lawn. It wasn't until the reception began that the fractures widened. Inside the ballroom, the tables were arranged in concentric circles around a raised dance floor. The Ashford family sat closest to the center. Brenda, Julian, Garrett's grandfather Robert, a cluster of aunts and cousins in jewel, toned silk, My mother's name card wasn't there. I scanned the room again, pulse quickening. She was seated near the back, beside the catering station, at a table marked Sinclair guests. Two of my college friends and an elderly neighbor from our old street were already sitting there. It was so far from the head table that I would have needed binoculars to see her expression clearly. I felt heat rise to my face. "Garrett," I whispered, tugging his sleeve. "Why is my mom back there?" He glanced over casually. "It's just the seating flow, Maya. Don't start tonight." Don't start. The phrase felt like a door closing. I forced a smile as another guest approached to congratulate us. "So propered." I let myself be steered into conversations about honeymoon plans and floral arrangements. Across the room, I saw my mother sitting straight, backed, hands folded in her lap, nodding politely as someone spoke to her. She didn't look upset, she looked practiced, and that scared me more. The second push happened during photo. The photographer called for immediate family only. Garrett's relatives moved quickly, forming a tight semicircle around us. I reached for my mother instinctively. She stepped forward, but Brenda's hand lightly pressed against her forearm. "Oh, Deanna," she said sweetly. "This one's just for the Ashfords." Just for the Ashfords. My mother hesitated. For half a second, she looked at me, and I froze. I don't know why. Maybe because 200 guests were watching. Maybe because I didn't want a scene. Maybe because somewhere deep down I had already learned to shrink. So my mother stepped back. And that was when Julian, Garrett's older brother, shifted uncomfortably beside us. I saw it, a flicker of something like embarrassment cross his face. The camera flashed, and my mother disappeared into the background. I told myself again, it's just tradition. It's just formality. But traditions aren't supposed to bruise. The third push wasn't subtle. It happened an hour later, and that was when everything changed. The third push wasn't subtle. It happened just as the photographer called for one last legacy photo: grandparents, parents, children, a generational portrait. Garrett's grandfather Robert stood at the center, dignified in a charcoal suit, his silver hair catching the light. Brenda positioned herself carefully at his right. Julian stepped in on the left. I was already standing beside Garrett when I saw my mother begin to move toward us. Not boldly, not demanding, just naturally, because she was my parent, because this was my wedding. Before she could fully step into the frame, Brenda turned, sharp, quick, and placed her hand flat against my mother's shoulder. It wasn't violent. It was worse than that. It was deliberate. "Oh no," Brenda said lightly, though her fingers tightened. "This one is just family." My mother's balance shifted. Her heel caught against the rug edge again, and she stumbled backward half a step. A catering assistant reached out to steady her. There was a murmur in the room. Not loud, but noticeable. I heard it the way you hear wind change direction. I turned fully then. "Mom," I started. But my mother had already righted herself. Her chin lifted slightly. Her mouth formed that same small, composed smile I had watched her use for years. "It's all right," she said softly. And she stepped back. The camera flashed again. This time, I didn't see anything but the space where she should have been. The reception music resumed. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar, but something had shifted inside me. I excused myself from a conversation with Garrett's cousin and crossed the ballroom floor toward the back table. The closer I got, the more details I noticed. My mother's place setting was slightly different from the others: a folded napkin without the gold trim, a smaller floral arrangement in the center of the table. The kind of subtle distinctions that could be dismissed as coincidence. But they weren't. "Are you okay?" I asked her, kneeling slightly beside her chair. She reached up and adjusted the loose strand of hair near my temple, like she used to when I was a child before school. "You look beautiful," she said. "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. Her eyes drifted toward the Ashford table at the front of the room. "It's your day," she said quietly. "Don't make it about anything else." That was when I noticed her hands. They were trembling. My mother's hands had only ever shaken once before, the night my father left. I remember her gripping the kitchen counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. Seeing that tremor again felt like watching history repeat itself. Before I could respond, Garrett appeared beside us. "There you are," he said, smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "They're about to start speeches." He glanced at my mother. "Everything all right here?" His tone was polite, too polite. My mother nodded. "Perfectly," she said. The speeches began predictably. Julian spoke first. He surprised me. "I want to say something honest," he began, clearing his throat. "Maya, you've brought something into this family that we didn't even realize we were missing." There was a pause. Perspective. A few people shifted in their seats. Julian's eyes flicked briefly toward Brenda before returning to me. "You challenge us." That's not always comfortable, but it's necessary. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it felt like a pebble dropped into still water. Brenda's smile tightened. Then it was her turn. She rose gracefully, champagne glass in hand. "When Garrett told me he was engaged," she began, "I'll admit I was surprised." Soft laughter from the Ashford table. "But Maya has proven herself adaptable." Adaptable. The word landed wrong. "She's adjusted beautifully to our way of life," Brenda continued. "And I trust she'll continue to honor the standards our family holds dear." Standards. I felt Garrett's hand squeeze mine under the table. I couldn't tell if it was reassurance or warning. The applause was polite, controlled. Then came the moment no one expected. My mother stood up. Not abrupt, just steadily. For a second I thought she was going to excuse herself. Instead, she walked toward the DJ booth. The room quieted in small increments, like someone slowly lowering the volume on a speaker. She spoke briefly to the DJ. He looked confused, then concerned. Then he handed her the microphone. The sound of feedback crackled through the ballroom. My heart stopped. "Diana," Brenda called lightly from her table. We weren't expecting another speech. My mother turned toward her. "I know," she said calmly. Her voice didn't shake. That terrified me more than if it had. I hadn't planned one. She faced the room. 200 guests, crystal chandeliers, white linen, gold trim, and my mother, in her navy dress she'd bought on sale 3 years ago, standing alone at the center. "I have spent the last 3 years," she began, trying to convince myself that silence was maturity. "You could have heard a fork drop." I told myself that when someone corrected my table manners or my pronunciation or my presence, it was refinement. A ripple moved through the Ashford side of the room. I told myself that when my daughter was excluded from conversations about her own wedding, it was just tradition. Garrett shifted beside me. "Deanna," he said under his breath. She didn't look at him. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. I also told myself that when I received messages like these, she continued, they were jokes. The DJ's screen lit up, and suddenly, projected across the white wall behind her were screenshots, text messages, Garrett's name at the top. My breath left my body. Garrett's name glowed at the top of the screen like a headline. The first message was time-stamped 11 months earlier. "Can you believe the ring she liked?" It looked like something from a clearance rack. I had to upgrade it before Mom saw it. A low murmur rolled across the ballroom. My stomach dropped so suddenly I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. I remembered that night. I had shown him a simple oval-cut ring I loved. Understated, elegant. He'd smiled and said, "Trust me, I'll handle it." The ring on my finger now, the one catching the chandelier light, suddenly felt heavier. Another message appeared. "She tries so hard. It's almost sweet." Then another. "Mom says we'll have to teach her how things are done. It'll be a project." The word project burned. Garrett stood up abruptly. "Maya, this is ridiculous," he hissed. "This is private. Private." The room was no longer murmuring. It was dividing. Some guests leaned forward, faces pale. Others shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Brenda. My mother didn't rush. She didn't dramatize. She simply swiped her screen. Now a different contact name appeared. Brenda Ashford. "Make sure the Sinclair woman is seated in the back. We don't need the help in the primary photos." The words hung there. The help. I heard someone gasp. Julian stood up slowly from his chair. "Mom," he said, his voice low but carrying. "You wrote that. Brenda's face had gone rigid. This is a gross invasion of privacy. My mother met her gaze evenly. I agree, she said. It is invasive to read messages not meant for you. It's also invasive to treat people as if they don't belong in rooms they helped build. Garrett turned to me. Say something, he demanded quietly. Tell them this is taken out of context. Out of context. I searched his face. For panic. For remorse. For shame. I found irritation. I never meant it like that, he whispered inartfully. You know how my family jokes, do I? I thought of every dinner where I laughed a second too late. Every comment about my background. Every suggestion that I was adjusting well. I thought of my mother sitting alone at that back table. My chest felt tight. Grandfather Robert rose slowly from his seat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Brenda, he said, is this true? Silence stretched. Brenda lifted her chin. I may have used poor phrasing, she said carefully, but we all know optics matter. Appearances matter. Not more than dignity, Robert replied. The room fractured then. Some relatives stood defensively behind Brenda. This is humiliation, one aunt snapped. Julian stepped forward, positioning himself between his mother and my own. No, he said quietly. Humiliation happened long before tonight. Maya, he said through clenched teeth, we can fix this. Just ask her to stop. Fix this. Like a seating chart, like a floral arrangement. I looked at my mother again. For the first time all evening, her eyes were wet, not with weakness, with release. I stayed quiet, she said into the microphone, because my daughter loved this man. And I believed love could grow in soil that wasn't perfect. Her voice wavered then, just slightly. But love does not require shrinking. And respect is not a luxury item. She lowered the microphone. The room was no longer elegant. It was raw. Garrett let go of my wrist. This is insane, he muttered. You're going to throw away our marriage over texts. Marriage. The word echoed strangely. I looked down at my ring. I remembered the way he proposed, orchestrated, photographed, polished. I remembered telling my mother afterward, he makes me feel chosen. Did he? Or had I simply felt upgraded? Maya, Garrett said more softly now, shifting tactics. Don't let them poison this. Them. As if my mother were an outside force. As if she hadn't been my entire foundation. I slid the ring off my finger. The movement was small, almost delicate, but the absence of its weight felt seismic. Gasps rippled through the guests. Garrett stared at my hand like he didn't recognize it. What are you doing? He whispered. I'm choosing, I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady. I'm choosing not to spend my life proving I deserve to stand in the front of a room. Brenda scoffed quietly. You're being dramatic. No, Julian said firmly. She's being clear. Grandfather Robert nodded once. Young lady, he said to me, no family is worth losing yourself. That sentence landed deeper than anything else that night. Garrett reached for me again. Please, he said now, finally, sounding unsure. We can talk about this privately. I looked at him, at the man I had imagined building a future with. And I realized something devastating. He wasn't shocked by the messages. He was shocked they were exposed. There's a difference. I walked toward my mother. The ballroom floor felt uneven beneath my heels. She looked at me as I approached, searching my face, almost bracing. I'm sorry, I whispered. For what? She asked. For not stepping forward sooner. She shook her head gently. You stepped forward now. I took her hand. It was warm, familiar, and together, we walked toward the exit. Behind us, the Ashford ballroom buzzed with fractured conversations, raised voices, alliances forming and dissolving. I didn't look back. The cool night air hit my skin as we stepped outside. For the first time all evening, I could breathe, but the consequences were only just beginning. The gravel crunched beneath our shoes as we stepped off the estate grounds. Behind us, the ballroom doors opened and closed in restless intervals, fragments of argument spilling into the night air before being swallowed again by music that had awkwardly resumed. My wedding music. My mother didn't speak at first. Kest. She simply kept walking, her hand wrapped around mine like she used to when I was little, and crossing busy streets scared me. Halfway down the curved driveway, I stopped. My dress felt suddenly enormous. The lace sleeves that had seemed delicate that morning now felt constricting. "Mom," I said. My voice finally. She turned toward me slowly. "You chose self-respect," she answered. The word respect felt heavier than the ring had. Headlights swept across the driveway. Julian's car pulled up beside us. He stepped out quickly, closing the door with more force than necessary. "I'm not here to convince you to go back," he said before either of us could speak. "I just wanted to make sure you're safe." There was something raw in his expression, not pity, not even apology, accountability. "I didn't know it was that bad," he added quietly. "I knew Mom could be rigid, but those messages," he exhaled, "that's not something I stand behind." My mother nodded politely. "Thank you," she said. Julian looked at me. "For what it's worth," he continued, "Grandfather's furious. Not at you." That almost made me laugh, the absurdity of it. Furious at his own daughter for finally being seen clearly. "Garrett," I asked before I could stop myself. Julian hesitated. "He's angry," he said honestly. "Mostly embarrassed." Embarrassed. That word followed me all the way home. We drove back to my mother's house in silence. The dress filled the passenger seat like an extra body. I could still smell gardenias in my hair. My makeup itched at the corners of my eyes. When we pulled into her driveway, I felt something settle in my chest, not relief exactly. Stability. Inside, the kitchen light cast a soft yellow glow across the countertops. Familiar. Grounded. Real. My mother hung up her shawl carefully. "I'm making tea," she said, as if we'd just returned from a long grocery trip instead of dismantling a wedding. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator magnets, old photos, a faded postcard from when I studied abroad, a grocery list written in her neat handwriting. My phone buzzed. Then again, and again. "Garrett, 6 missed calls, 3 messages. We need to talk." And Kajak. "This isn't how adults handle conflict. You blindsided me." "Blindsided." I typed back slowly. "No." I finally opened my eyes. He called again immediately. I declined. My mother placed a mug of chamomile tea in front of me. The steam rose between us like something fragile. "Are you?" she asked softly. The question startled me. For what? For speaking. I stared at her. "Mom," I said, my throat tightening. "I'm angry at myself." She sat across from me. "You were trying to make your marriage work," she said. "That's not weakness." It felt like it. Every time they made a comment, every time I pretended not to notice, she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "There is a difference," she said gently, "between patience and permission." The sentence landed in a place that had been tender for years. The next morning, the fallout began in full. My social media was flooded. Half the guests had posted videos of the reception before leaving the estate. Clips of the projection screen, clips of Brenda's expression tightening, clips of me removing my ring. Some captions called it empowering. Others called it dramatic. One comment read, "This is what happens when you marry about." I closed the app. Garrett left a voicemail mid-morning. His voice sounded different. Less controlled. "Maya," he said, "I'm sorry you felt hurt. But this could have been handled privately. You humiliated my mother." I replayed that sentence 3 times. "You humiliated my mother." "No, not I'm ashamed of what I said." That was when something inside me cooled, not hardened, clarified. Over the next few days, I moved my things out of the apartment Garrett and I had shared. He wasn't there when I packed. His assistant coordinated the logistics instead. It felt transactional, efficient, too clean for what had just ended. As I folded my clothes into boxes, I thought about the early days of our relationship, the way he'd admired my ambition. "You think differently," he used to say. It's refreshing. At some point, refreshing had become inconvenient. My mother didn't hover while I unpacked back at her house. She gave me space, quiet, respect. On the 4th evening after the wedding, she joined me at the dining table where old business folders were spread out. You still have that proposal draft? She asked casually. For the corporate restructuring consultancy. I nodded. Why? She adjusted her glasses. I've been thinking, she said. We've both spent years adjusting to rooms that weren't built for us. I looked up. What if, she continued slowly, we build our own? There it was. Not revenge, not retaliation. Construction. We stayed up past midnight, refining services, identifying markets where businesses needed ethical restructuring and cultural alignment consulting, the very thing the Ashfords had clearly lacked. By the end of the week, Sinclair and Daughter Solutions was more than a name scribbled on paper. It was a direction. Garrett called twice more during that time. The second call sounded softer. I can change, he said. I didn't realize how much pressure I was under. Pressure. Another word that disguised choice. I hope you do, I told him calmly. But change isn't something you announce. It's something you live. There was silence on the line. Then, so that's it. I looked around my mother's kitchen, at the drafts, the plans, the future forming quietly. No, I said, that's growth. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. But the true test of whether I had chosen correctly was still ahead. The true test came quietly. Not in a grand apology, not in a public statement, but in an invitation. 3 weeks after the wedding, that wasn't. A cream envelope arrived at my mother's house, heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, Ashford Family Estate. I knew before I opened it what it would be. A private reconciliation hosted by Grandfather Robert. My mother set the envelope down on the kitchen counter and looked at me. You don't have to go, she said. I traced the edge of the paper with my fingertip. I know, I replied. That was the difference now. Before, I would have felt obligated, pressured, responsible for smoothing discomfort. Now it was a choice, and I chose to go, not to fix anything, but to see clearly. The estate looked the same as it had on my wedding day. Perfect hedges, white columns, polished stone. But I felt different walking up those steps, lighter. Not because the situation was easy, but because I wasn't trying to fit anymore. Inside, the dining room was set formally but sparsely, only 8 chairs this time. Grandfather Robert at the head, Julian beside him. Brenda across from an empty seat clearly meant for me. Garrett stood near the window when I entered. He looked tired, older. When our eyes met, there was something unfamiliar there. Not confidence, uncertainty. Thank you for coming, Robert said, rising slightly in his seat. Both of you. My mother and I sat down together. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted chicken. The same polished domestic elegance as always. But there were no photographers, no guests. Just truth waiting to be addressed. Dinner was served quietly. Silverware clinked. No one rushed to fill the silence. Finally, Robert, I will speak plainly, he said. Our family prides itself on legacy, on standards, but standards without integrity are decoration. Brenda stiffened. Father, no, he said gently but firmly. Let me finish. He turned to my mother. Deanna, you were treated without respect. That is unacceptable. The word unacceptable hung in the room like a bell that had finally been rung. Brenda folded her napkin carefully. If this is about optics again, it is about humanity, Julian cut in. Garrett finally spoke. I've apologized, he said quietly. I looked at him. No, I replied evenly. You said you were sorry. I felt hurt. His jaw tightened. Isn't that the same thing? No, I said. One centers you. The other centers the harm. Silence. Brenda exhaled sharply. You exposed private family conversations to 200 people, she said to my mother. That was vindictive. My mother met her gaze calmly. It was documented, she said, repeatedly. Brenda turned to me. And you, she continued, you embarrassed your husband on your wedding day. I held her stare. He embarrassed himself long before I removed the ring. Julian shifted in his seat, hiding a small nod. Garrett looked between us. I was raised a certain way, he said finally. There are expectations. There are always expectations, my mother replied softly. The question is whether they require someone else to shrink. That word again. Shrink. It had followed me like a shadow for years. Robert leaned back in his chair. Garrett, he said steadily, I have spent decades building a name, but a name is only as strong as the character behind it. Garrett swallowed. I love her, he said, suddenly turning toward me. I do. I didn't realize how much of my thinking was influenced by my environment. There it was. The closest thing to honesty I had heard from him. I believe you love me, I said quietly. But love without reflection becomes entitlement. His eyes flickered. I'm in therapy, he added quickly. I've started sessions. That surprised me. Julian looked at him with cautious approval. That's good, I said cynically. For you? He searched my face. For us, he asked. The question felt fragile. I inhaled slowly. There is a difference, I said carefully, between genuine transformation and convenient regret. Brenda's lips pressed thin. This is absurd, she muttered. Robert stood. This dinner was not to negotiate a wedding, he said firmly. It was to acknowledge wrongdoing. He looked at my mother. And to offer apology. He bowed his head slightly. I am sorry. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't defensive. It was simple. My mother nodded. Thank you, she said. Brenda did not apologize. Garrett reached across the table toward me. I can become better, he said. I believed him. But belief wasn't the same as obligation. I hope you do, I replied gently. For your own sake. His hand fell back to the table. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. Loving someone does not require marrying who they are today, while hoping they become someone else tomorrow. We finished dinner. When we left the estate that night, the air felt crisp. Honest. Garrett walked us to the door. I'll keep trying, he said quietly. I know, I answered. But I didn't turn back this time. 3 months later, Sinclair and Daughter Solutions had its first major contract. A mid-sized firm struggling with internal culture restructuring hired us after hearing about the wedding incident. Irony has a sense of humor. But what began as gossip turned into credibility. We specialized in ethical communication audits, structural transparency, leadership accountability, the very things. Our office was small, just a rented suite above a bookstore, but it was ours. The scent of paper and coffee drifted through the hallway each morning. Some days were exhausting. Some proposals were rejected, but I never felt small. Garrett called once more after that dinner. I'm different already, he said. I smiled softly at the phone. Then live it, I replied. Don't announce it. We haven't spoken since, and that's not bitterness, it's boundary. Success did not arrive like fireworks. It arrived like rent due on the first of the month, like early mornings with spreadsheets open and coffee going cold beside my keyboard. Like my mother pacing softly while rehearsing a presentation under her breath. 3 months turned into 6. Sinclair and Daughter Solutions grew the way most honest things grow. Slowly, then steadily, then suddenly. Our second contract came from a regional manufacturing firm whose HR director had watched the wedding clip. I don't want my company to end up like that family, she told us during our initial meeting. Polished outside, rotting inside. I recognized the tone in her voice. Fear of becoming what you secretly already are. We worked with them for 12 weeks, structured feedback systems, anonymous reporting channels, leadership workshops that It was strange standing in boardrooms now, speaking confidently about dignity and culture, knowing those lessons had been carved into me through humiliation. Pain had been repurposed into clarity. One evening, after a long client session, my mother and I sat on the floor of our tiny office, backs against the wall, takeout containers balanced between us. You realize, she said thoughtfully, that none of this would exist if you'd stayed. I stared at the ceiling. I know. Do you regret it? The question lingered. I searched myself carefully. I regret the illusion, I said finally. But not the ending. She nodded slowly. There is a specific kind of peace that comes when you stop rehearsing conversations in your head, when you no longer imagine alternate versions of events. I had stopped replaying the ballroom. Stopped wondering what would have happened if I'd pulled her into that photo anyway, because the truth was simple. If I had to fight that hard to include my own mother on my wedding day, what would the next 40 years have required? Garrett's name resurfaced unexpectedly one Tuesday afternoon. Not through a call, through a headline. Ashford Enterprises announces internal restructuring initiative. I stared at the screen. Julian's name was listed as leading the reform. There was mention of cultural recalibration and commitment to inclusive leadership. No mention of scandal. No mention of wedding footage that had quietly circulated beyond our circle. A week later, I received an email. Not from Garrett, from Julian. Maya, you were right about more than you know. Some lessons take public mirrors to become visible. I hope you're well. No request. No pressure. Just acknowledgement. I replied with one line. Growth is quiet. I'm glad to hear it's happening. And I meant it. The last time Garrett called, it wasn't to persuade me. It was to tell me he understood. His voice sounded calmer than I remembered. I've been unpacking things, he said. Not just about you. About who I thought I had to be. I listened. He didn't ask to meet. He didn't promise dramatic transformation. I don't know if we would have made each other happy, he admitted. Honesty, at last, without performance. Maybe not, I agreed. There was a pause. I'm sorry, he said. Not sorry you felt hurt. Not sorry about the scene. Just, I'm sorry. It landed differently this time, because it didn't ask for anything in return. Thank you, I replied. When we hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't feel longing. I felt closure. The kind that doesn't slam doors. It simply locks them gently. Months passed. Our client list expanded. My mother's laughter returned to its full, unguarded sound, the one I remembered from childhood before responsibility had tightened her edges. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I found the navy blazer she had worn to those early wedding meetings. She had folded it neatly into a storage box. I held it up. You're not wearing this to another Ashford event, are you? I teased. She laughed. There won't be another one. No, I said softly. There won't. We donated it that weekend. Not out of spite. Out of release. People still occasionally ask me about the wedding. About whether I would do it differently now. I think about that question often. Because the truth is uncomfortable. If my mother hadn't spoken, I might have continued shrinking. I might have convinced myself that discomfort was refinement. That exclusion was tradition. That love required endurance without limit. But here is what I've learned. Losing a wedding is not the same as losing a future. Sometimes it is the first honest step toward one. Sinclair and Daughter Solutions recently signed its largest contract yet, a national firm seeking long-term advisory partnership. When we signed the paperwork, my mother squeezed my hand the way she had the night we left the estate. You built this, she said. No, I corrected gently. We did, and that is the difference between partnership and performance. One asks you to stand beside, the other asks you to stand behind. Tonight, as I lock up the office and step into the cool evening air, I no longer feel the ghost, weight of a ring on my finger. I feel something steadier. Choice, dignity, room to breathe. Sometimes people ask me if I was brave that night, if walking out of my own wedding made me fearless. The truth is, I wasn't fearless. I was tired. Tired of translating disrespect into tradition. Tired of calling exclusion misunderstanding. Tired of watching my mother fold herself smaller so I could feel bigger. And here's what I've come to understand. Love should never require you to shrink the people who built you. If someone asks you to choose between dignity and harmony, what they are really asking is for you to perform comfort at the cost of truth. And harmony built on silence is not peace, it's pressure. I lost a wedding, but I gained clarity. I gained a partnership with my mother that is stronger than any ceremony. I gained work that aligns with my values. I gained mornings where I don't wake up rehearsing who I need to be. Garrett did change, in his own way. I believe that. And I genuinely hope his growth continues. But growth is not something you wait around to witness when it costs you your own sense of self. You can wish someone well, without walking back into the room that diminished you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting louder. It's stepping out quietly, and building something that doesn't require you to apologize for existing. So I want to ask you something gently. Empit. Have you ever stayed somewhere too long because you thought love meant endurance? And if you had to choose today between shrinking and standing tall, what would you do? If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts. Your stories matter more than you know. And if you believe in protecting your peace, in honoring your worth, in building rooms where everyone belongs, stay. Listen, support this space. Because sometimes the most powerful inheritance we can leave behind isn't wealth, it's dignity.